Debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to participate in the second reading debate on Bill S-16, an Act to amend the Criminal Code, Trafficking and Contraband. This bill proposes amendments to the Criminal Code to create a new offence of trafficking in contraband tobacco and to provide minimum penalties for imprisonment for persons who are convicted for a second or subsequent time of this offence. To help reduce the problem of trafficking in contraband tobacco, the government committed to establish mandatory jail time for repeat offenders of trafficking in contraband tobacco in its 2011 election platform. This bill fulfills that commitment. Mr. Speaker, there are no offences in the Criminal Code dealing with contraband tobacco at the present time. While there exists an offence of selling contraband tobacco in the Excise Tax Act 2001, that offence exists in support of our fiscal policy in the area of tobacco. This government believes that something more is required to deal with the problem that has become trafficking in contraband tobacco. This bill prohibits the sale, offer for sale, the transportation, delivery, distribution, or possession for the purpose of sale of tobacco product or raw leaf tobacco that is not packaged unless it is stamped. The terms tobacco product, raw leaf product, package, and stamp have the same meaning as in Section 2 of the Excise Act 2001. The penalty for a first offence is up to 6 months imprisonment on summary conviction and up to 5 years imprisonment if prosecuted on indictment. Repeat offenders convicted of this new offence and where 10,000 cigarettes or more than 10 kilograms or more of any tobacco product or 10 kilograms or more of raw leaf tobacco was involved would be sentenced to a minimum of 90 days on a second conviction, a minimum of 180 days on a third conviction, and a minimum of 2 years less a day on subsequent convictions. Mr. Speaker, in order to place this bill in context, I think it is important to describe the serious problem that has become the trafficking in contraband tobacco. As you will recall, the contraband tobacco market first became a significant issue in Canada in the late 1980s and early 1990s. During that period, and more legally manufactured Canadian cigarettes destined for duty-free market began making their way back into the Canadian underground economy. The high retail price of legitimate cigarettes made smuggling them back across the border a lucrative illicit business. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police and Canada Customs seized record quantities of contraband tobacco. The RCMP was also engaged in investigating this illegal activity at its source. These investigations eventually led to negotiated settlements involving several tobacco companies paying more than $1.5 billion in criminal fines and civil restitution. However, the illicit tobacco market in Canada has rebounded in recent years and once again become an acute problem. Mr. Speaker, tobacco is not just a Canadian problem. The illicit trafficking of tobacco is a multi-billion-dollar business worldwide today, fueling organized crime and corruption and spurring addiction to a deadly product. Last year, smuggling experts, customs officials, and diplomats of nearly 160 countries, including Canada, gathered in Geneva, Switzerland, to finalize the development of what was eluded governments for decades, an international instrument allowing for a global crackdown on the black market in tobacco. Under the auspices of the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, a global treaty to curb tobacco use, delegates worked to complete protocol to stop cigarette smuggling. Mr. Speaker, illicit tobacco feeds an underground economy that supports many of the most violent actors of the world stage. Organized crime syndicates and terrorist groups facilitate global distribution and use the province to finance their activities. Perhaps even more troubling is the impact that smuggling has on the public health crisis caused by tobacco. Worldwide, 1 out of 10 adults dies prematurely from tobacco-related diseases such as lung cancer, emphysema, cardiovascular disease, and stroke. If the trend continues to hold, tobacco will kill about 500 million people. By 2030, that figure will reach 8 million deaths a year, and with cigarettes being heavily marketed in poor countries, 80% of those deaths will be in the developing world. Over the 21st century, an estimated 1 billion people could die from tobacco use. In Canada today, illegal tobacco activity is primarily connected to the illegal manufacture and not to the diversion of illegally manufactured products as was in the past. I should point out also that it includes to a lesser degree the illegal importation of counterfeit cigarettes and other forms of illicit tobacco from overseas. Organized crime plays a central role in the contraband tobacco trade in Canada, and that means that this illegal activity is linked with other kinds of crime. Most of the organized crime groups across the country involved in the illicit tobacco market are also active in other forms of criminality. The problem is further complicated by the international aspect of the illicit tobacco trade. Transnational crime of the type found in contraband tobacco smuggling is considered a threat to public safety and national security and has a direct impact on individual Canadians, small businesses, and the economy. It also has implications for relationships with our international partners, especially the United States. On this issue, I would like to point out, Mr. Speaker, that Canada and the United States share a long history of law enforcement cooperation across the border. Recent and ongoing threat assessments have identified organized crime as the most prevalent threat encountered at the shared border. This includes significant levels of contraband trafficking, ranging from illicit drugs and tobacco to firearms, notably handguns, and human smuggling. In this regard, Canada and the United States have explored the concept of integrated cross-border maritime law enforcement operations. Joint maritime law enforcement vessels manned by specially trained and designated Canadian and U.S. states law enforcement officers have been authorized to enforce the law on both sides of the international boundary line in the course of integrated cross-border operations. Mr. Speaker, the contraband tobacco market is driven largely by illegal operations in both Canada and the United States. The provinces of Ontario and Quebec have the highest concentration of contraband tobacco manufacturing operations, the majority of the high-volume smuggling points, and the largest number of consumers of contraband tobacco. The 2012 Criminal Intelligence Service Canada National Threat Assessment on Organized and Serious Crime identified 58 organized crime groups which are involved in the contraband tobacco trade throughout Canada, 35 of which are currently operating in central Canada. These criminal networks reinvest profits from the manufacture and distribution of contraband tobacco into other forms of criminality, including trafficking of illicit drugs, firearms, and human smuggling. Furthermore, the RCMP reports that violence and intimidation tactics continue to be associated with the contraband tobacco trade. Since 2008 and up to May 2012, the RCMP has laid approximately 4,925 charges under the Excise Act 2001 and disrupted approximately 66 organized crime groups involved in the contraband tobacco trade throughout Canada. During that time period, approximately 3.5 million cartons, unmarked bags of cigarettes were seized nationally by the RCMP, along with numerous vehicles, vessels, and properties. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the illicit tobacco trade is dominated by criminal organizations motivated by the lure of significant profits and relatively low risks. Enforcement actions are therefore directed at increasing the risk associated with contraband tobacco activities, dismantling illegal manufacturing facilities, disrupting distribution supply lines, apprehending key figures, confiscating conveyances such as trucks and boats, and seizing the proceeds of crime. These actions have the dual goal of disrupting the illicit flow of tobacco and weakening the organized crime groups involved in the production, distribution, smuggling, and trafficking of contraband tobacco. Contraband tobacco remains a serious threat to our communities, and if left unchecked, organized crime will continue to profit at the expense of the health and safety of Canadians. Overall, the proposals in Bill S-16 represent a tailored approach to the imposition of mandatory minimum penalties for serious contraband tobacco activities. The bill proposes minimum penalties only in the cases where there are certain aggravating factors present, such as a conviction for a second or subsequent time. The Government of Canada recognizes that contraband tobacco smuggling is a serious problem. Certainly, Canadians want to be protected from offenders involved in these contraband tobacco smuggling operations which threaten their safety and that of their families. They also want to be protected from the violences associated with contraband tobacco activities. Protecting society from criminals is a responsibility the government takes seriously. Accordingly, This bill is part of the government's continued commitment to take steps to protect Canadians and make our streets and communities safer. Canadians want a justice system that has a clear and strong law that denounce and punish serious crimes, including illicit activities involving contraband tobacco. They want laws that impose penalties that adequately reflect the serious nature of these crimes. This bill does that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député de Brassard-La-Prairie.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais remercier le secrétaire parlementaire pour son discours. Le secrétaire parlementaire a mentionné que c'était justement une promesse électorale des conservateurs depuis longtemps. On sait que la contrebande de tabac est un problème, un fléau, il l'a mentionné, autant au niveau de la sécurité publique, autant au niveau de la santé, autant au niveau des pertes de revenus pour le gouvernement. On a mentionné que ça pouvait justement aider le crime organisé. Sachant tout ça et sachant justement certains problèmes qu'il a soulevés, j'aimerais savoir quelles sont les consultations qui ont été faites par le gouvernement sur un projet de loi qui est aussi important. On sait qu'on parle d'impact, entre autres lorsqu'on parle du crime organisé, lorsqu'on parle justement des provinces. On sait que plusieurs provinces, dont le Québec, entre autres, ont fait des études là-dessus. Est-ce qu'il y a une consultation non seulement avec les provinces, avec les autres ordres, entre autres aussi avec les Premières Nations? Est-ce qu'il y a une consultation lorsque le projet de loi avant que le projet de loi ait été déposé?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Le gouvernement fédéral consulte toujours les provinces, particulièrement lors de conférences territoriales, provinciales et fédérales. Évidemment, la criminalité en ce qui concerne le troc de cigarettes illégitimes, ça touche à la fois les provinces comme que ça touche le fédéral. Et puis, on sait que les provinces sont chargées de l'administration de la justice. Alors, directement, c'est leurs ressources qui doivent venir en aide pour contrer ce dilemme. Alors, la consultation se continue comme toujours.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Peterborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a particularly important bill in my region. I can tell you that my local health services, my county health unit and so forth have came out. The Peterborough this week, for example, one of the local newspapers has taken this on as an issue where we are trying to prevent cheap cigarettes from getting to our school kids. One of the deterrents that we have put in place to prevent people from becoming addicted to tobacco and then suffering the tobacco-related illnesses later in life is to make them cost prohibitive. But often these contraband cigarettes are exceptionally cheap. They undermine the tax system as well, Mr. Speaker. But setting that aside, we want to make sure that we are preventing children from having access to tobacco. Can this member speak about the importance of doing that and why the government's brought this bill at this time?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I thank the honourable member for his very relevant question. Obviously, the issue of contraband tobacco attacks Canada's initiatives on many fronts. It attacks it on the health issue. It attacks it on the issue of gaining access to a dangerous product for many youth. Of course, the Department of Health has taken many steps to bring forward warnings of what the dangers of tobacco are, whether it be hiding them behind screens when it comes to purchasing, whether it puts warning signs, rather grotesque warning signs on the packages. But those, of course, are the cigarettes which are distributed legally. What can we do about cheap tobacco finding its way onto schoolyards at a very affordable price? I mean, it's a matter of breaking up this activity because it's bad for health. It also finances organized crime, which we know uses the funds which it doesn't pay taxes on to field its many activities. One of them becoming very important, of course, is the traffic in human beings. So it's a vicious circle when it comes to breaking up illegal activities. They're all very intricately intertied, but one of them that seems to be, I guess, more easily or hard to discern is tobacco. And tobacco, of course, is legal when it's sold along the rules and regulations of the Government of Canada. So how does one really tell, without looking carefully, whether or not a cigarette to smoke has been legally sold, legally produced, versus one that has not?
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Esquimalt-Juan-de-Fuca.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There's no doubt that all Canadians should share the concern about contraband tobacco and keeping tobacco out of the hands of kids. But when you look at both the record of both the Liberals and Conservatives on this, probably the most effective thing you can do is effective ports policing. When I talked to tobacco companies about this recently, they estimated that more than half of the contraband tobacco in this country is coming in through the Port of Vancouver from China, and that the fact the contraband the fake is so good, they even include excise stamps that look very much like legitimate excise stamps. So in the 1990s, the Liberals eliminated the ports police in Vancouver, and now the Conservatives have so cut back on the border services that my understanding is that we don't check any containers coming into Vancouver unless we have a specific tip of a specific illegal substance being in that container. So not providing resources has provided a much bigger loophole to drive contraband tobacco through than would have been the case before.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, what I would add, in conjunction with this bill, there will be a special enforcement force of 50 specially trained RCMP officers who will be dedicated specifically to breaking up the contraband of trafficking of illegal tobacco. And you heard me in the speech, I trust, talk about a joint force of Mariners who are both especially trained from the United States and Canada, which are on a customs mandate, which will do cross-border verification, and this within the context of the Marine.
Generally commentaire, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I agree contraband cigarettes are a real problem and they're a threat in Canada, and they do fuel organized crime. I'm wondering if the Honourable Member has any thoughts on the cuts to Canada Border Services agents and whether or not we shouldn't rethink those cuts, bringing back in terms of not just contraband tobacco, but obviously contraband drugs, bring back the canine crews that used to be able to go through imports to Canada at the border and spot contraband tobacco just as they can spot other illicit drugs.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for a question. The Government of Canada has invested significantly in this area, and if you've noted in my speech, Mr. Speaker, we're strengthening the perimeter not only in Canada but also in North America. We're working jointly with the United States and enforcing our common security interests. And of course, contraband is present in the United States as is in Canada, so we'll continue to work with the United States, our very close partner, in strengthening what security is for both our countries. We'll continue to invest significantly in breaking up trafficking of illicit cigarettes.
Question et commentaire. C'est toujours comme ça. L'honorable député de Compton-Hampstead.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Écoutez, moi, je trouve ça, je vais reprendre la même question qu'on répète depuis bien des fois. C'est les coupures qu'il y a eu dans les services frontaliers, dans les services de la GRC, et dans les unités spéciales. C'est ces coupures-là qui ont fait extrêmement mal pour combattre le trafic, et entre autres le trafic des armes et du tabac et des drogues même. Et quand on continue à couper dans ces agences-là, c'est impossible de combattre le crime, quand même qu'on augmente les peines d'emprisonnement et toutes ces choses-là. Ça fait absolument rien sur le terrain. C'est les ressources matérielles que les gens ont besoin. Je parle aux policiers, moi, en première ligne, et c'est les ressources matérielles qui ont besoin. Les bateaux n'ont même pas été entretenus depuis 2 ans. Les bateaux de la GRC sur le lac Champlain et le lac Nymphe-Magog n'ont même pas été entretenus. Il n'y a même pas eu de service fait depuis 2 ans. Ils ne sont même pas capables de les sortir sur l'eau pour courir après les bateaux qui traversent avec des quantités incommensurables de cigarettes. Donc, c'est impossible de combattre le crime sans mettre les ressources à la bonne place.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Monsieur le Président, on continue à investir dans ce qui concerne la sécurité publique et comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure dans la réponse précédente, il y a une nouvelle unité de 50 membres de la GRC qui seront dédiés spécifiquement à casser le trafic de drogue et également du tabac illicite.
Questions et commentaires. Une autre question, l'honorable député de Hochelaga.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Tout à l'heure, mon collègue de Brossard-la-Prairie a posé une question et il n'a pas eu une réponse très exacte. Alors, la réponse, c'est est-ce qu'il y a eu des consultations? Le secrétaire parlementaire a dit les consultations continuent. Est-ce que ça veut dire qu'il n'y a pas eu de consultation avant de monter le projet de loi, comme par exemple dans d'autres projets de loi comme C-49, où c'est le ministre qui décide et ensuite on va consulter les gens sur ce qui devrait être fait après coup?
Exact.
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Le verbe consulter se conjugue au passé simple et au présent et au futur. La consultation, ça couvre le passé, le présent et le futur.
Reprise de débat.